working together in a team and also working with the librarian. So that is a long process. But today's discussion should get us started in trying to understand what are scoping and systematic reviews. So today we will begin with a brief introduction of what these reviews are. They are different, they're not the same. And that is, it'll be good to understand how are they different from each other, and when and why should you undertake a systematic review, the process of doing a systematic review and a scoping review. And then we share some examples of scoping and systematic reviews of the work that we've published. And lastly, we'll discuss about how can you begin your review journey. And then, of course, we'll end it with Q&A. If we look at what is a systematic review, it is looking at literature which is already existing on a particular topic with a very rigorous and a clearly documented methodology. What that allows you when you're looking at a methodology, this is towards searching your studies, but also how you select those studies for inclusion in your systematic reviews, in your final review of literature. This will help you to minimize any bias that you might have in the results. And a clear documentation of your process and how you are selecting those studies in terms of your strategy, inclusions and inclusions. We'll talk more about that. Your search can be reproduced and duplicated, but also it can be updated. So because there is so much rigor in conducting a systematic review of literature, it can be hard to publish them, but they are a great way to review your literature and have them published, because it does give you high citations as well. So it is a great way to look at literature and to review existing literature on a particular topic, because it gives you that clear searching strategy and a methodology. Systematic reviews are considered a gold standard when it comes to evidence generation. So if you look at the hierarchy of evidence and you look at the various types of studies that are here, systematic reviews is on the top because there is so much rigor that goes into conducting systematic reviews. There is a lot of we do quality assessed studies as well that we select, and we'll discuss all that later, but it's considered to be quite up high. It's considered to be a very rigorous form of evidence generation. So it's really useful to conduct a systematic review of literature. A scoping review is, we'll discuss that actually as we do go. So a scoping review is about exploratory projects that systematically map literature available on a topic and identifying any key concepts, theories, and sources available of evidence and gaps in research. So a key difference around scoping reviews and systematic reviews is that a scoping review has a very broad scope. It would be, if you're trying to understand what is the literature on a particular topic, very broadly, then you're after a scoping review. For instance, we did a scoping review of trying to understand all literature that is around women and WASH, which is water, sanitation, and hygiene in Nepal, and trying to understand what is the literature telling us. So in places where systematic reviews cannot be conducted, a scoping review is considered. And it is where your purpose of your study is to identify what are the knowledge gaps in literature. What is this body of literature that is available? So you're scoping your existing literature, you're mapping the literature, and that is where a scoping review becomes very useful. And it also allows you to clarify any concepts or to investigate any research conduct. So scoping reviews can be broad, they can be done on where you're trying to understand and scope the existing literature that's available out there. They can be useful precursors to systematic reviews and can be used to confirm the relevance of inclusion criteria and potential questions. So you're hearing a lot about inclusion and exclusion criteria. We'll discuss that in length as well. So when I say inclusion and exclusion criteria, it's more about the literature that I would include in my systematic review and that I would not include in my systematic reviews. We will discuss more of that. And scoping reviews is not a traditional literature review. It also requires a clear methodology. It is extremely structured and is also a great way of now synthesizing literature and looking at the scope of literature that is available out there. Yes, and now I'll hand over to my colleague Daniel, who will talk about the details of systematic review.
Thank you, Nidhi, for that introductory conversation. So now we've just looked at the key differences between a scoping review and a systematic review. But we want to just, in the next couple of slides, spend some time to talk about systematic review, how it looks like. But we cannot talk about systematic review without first talking about what we call PRISMA, because systematic review is more about how it is done, and there are well-documented structures and processes for undertaking systematic review. And one of the most used frameworks is what we call the PRISMA guideline, and PRISMA generally is the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analysis. Now, this PRISMA, it's an evidence-based set of items which are often used whenever you want to undertake a systematic review. It provides us with at least 17 items to guide us, which makes the systematic review process quite interesting, at the same time a little bit laborious. Now, the PRISMA helps us to focus our review on largely intervention-based studies, because the originality of a systematic review is from the health and medical sciences, as we talked about earlier on. But increasingly, we are also now adapting PRISMA to our kind of social science studies that is not strictly intervention-based, but that utilizes research questions and research objectives. And using that, we are able to follow the PRISMA guidelines. If you want to access the PRISMA, the latest version of the guideline, you can just do that from the PRISMA website. It's out there, and I'll be showing one of the PRISMA flow charts in that. Now, one of the interesting things about PRISMA guidelines is that it also has a checklist to guide you as a systematic reviewer, and this checklist is often attached to your systematic review when you are done and you want to submit to any journal for publication. They will want to see your checklist. Now, this checklist clearly tells you what to do, the frames in terms of the title and what to consider in your title, the abstract, the introduction, and the methods, and all your analysis. And the essence of the checklist is to help you as someone conducting a review using this guideline to tell the reviewer or to tell the readers the specific locations within your systematic review where you have indicated the various sections or the various items in your document. And I don't think I have to go over all the key markers for all the sections of the reporting. Can you take me to the next one, please?
Yeah, sure.
Now, so briefly, that's about PRISMA, and I will show the flow chart shortly, but you cannot think about systematic review without having a good understanding of PRISMA, the logic of PRISMA, and how it works. In addition to that, the essence of systematic review is to respond to a question, or is to respond to a problem or an issue. Now, often, because of the nature of systematic review, the questions that are often set are expected to be very specific and very clear to the point, so that when you go out to conduct your systematic review, you are well focused. Now, there are different frameworks that help us to be able to develop a question that is fit for systematic review. It's not every question that is fit for systematic review. When the question is extremely broad and not well focused, then we'll be talking about a scoping review. But if the question is very specific and straight to the issues, then you'll be thinking about a systematic review. And to be able to clearly write a question that is fitting for a systematic review, one of the frameworks that's often used is the PCOR. There are different frameworks. There's a PCOR, there's a PCOT, but we just chose to show the PCOR as a framework to guide how we can structure a question, a research question, fitting for a systematic review or any other review. And of course, as we can see, the PCOR is an abbreviation of starting with the population or the problem, the intervention, the control or the comparison, and then the outcome. We have attempted to provide a sample question that kind of uses this PCOT, but it might not be the classical example, but assuming that you are intending to undertake a systematic review and you want to craft your research question around this PCOT framework, you could do something like this. One, you want to know whether trauma-informed interventions, for example, support the integration of LGBTQI plus refugees. So you are thinking of, one, the population of interest, or the problem of interest. The population of interest is the refugees, LGBTQI plus refugees background, that's the P. Then the intervention or the service. This intervention, Nidhi has warned me not to talk about intervention, but to say more about services, programs, and support. So the intervention here in the I is the trauma-informed intervention, because when the assumption is that when refugees come, we get refugees trying to integrate them. There are different services that help them to integrate. But if you have someone from the LGBTQI plus community, how do we support this group of people? Noting that refugees generally would have trauma issues that needs to be supported. So your review wants to know whether there are interventions that support this effective integration. And so you could just use this PCOR to guide, to kind of check the quality of your question to help you in your review, so that if you want to move on with the review, you clearly know, one, your key search terms, your key search words, the things that you should be plugging into the databases to look out for. So that's just one example. We have the PCORs, we have the PCOT, there is a T aspect of it in terms of time, but those are strictly intervention-based kind of work. But if it is not an intervention-based review and it's more research question informed, again, you can find a way to check whether you can appropriately subject your question to a systematic review.
Yeah, and I think just adding at this is the time also then to think, is this a scoping review that you're trying to do, or is it a systematic review that you would be wanting to do? Because like Daniel said, in a systematic review, it's a very focused question. You have clear definitions of what do you mean by trauma-informed interventions, and what do the integration mean, and what is it that you're trying to explore or understand within the community of LGBTQI and refugees. And so you define what is it that you mean by these communities as well. So I think at this stage, you can clearly then also identify, is it a scoping review that you're trying to do, or is it a systematic review? So it is those back and forth brainstorming within the team that really helps. And this question, informing and developing a question with clear objectives of what your study is trying to understand, it will also allow you to then design, is it a scoping review, is it a systematic review? So that is what it'll help as well.
Yep.
Sorry, thanks, Daniel. Just adding.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. All right, I guess we can move on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how do I do this? How do we approach the whole idea of a systematic review. Now, understandably, systematic reviews cannot be done by one person because it's a very elaborate process. It's often done with teams. And so there has to be a team to work on this. Also because of the rigorous nature of quality control and checking. So it's not a one-man thing. Now, so team development is important. Then, of course, as a team, you collectively develop your search strategy, bearing in mind your search question. Then, of course, once you are clear in your mind on the search question, which can take several days of refining and cleaning up, then you would have to also undertake your search from the databases and from gray literature, depending on what your focus is. Recently, we have found EndNote quite useful when it comes to systematic review. There are some automated systems of data search that can send your search straight into EndNote for you, and you can clean up from EndNote, removing duplicates from all the data search. So building skills in the use of EndNote to sanitize your data search or your literature search is very useful at this point. And once you are clear in your mind and all the search has been done, retrieved from the databases, then screening starts. Screening would have to be predetermined how you want to undertake the screening, who does what as part of the team. Then, of course, that leads us to finalize all the studies that we want to include in our review based on a predetermined inclusion and exclusion criteria that is done as part of your methodology or thinking about what to be part of your work and what not to be part of it. Once we have finalized on the studies and have extracted all that, then our data analysis starts. Now, systematic review analysis usually takes the form of either narrative synthesis of the core ideas or the emerging ideas from all the literature, or it can come in the form of meta-analysis where the review process, that's why we have meta-analysis, where the review also takes into account already existing quantitative data, or it can also come in the form of a meta-ethnography. Nidhi has done some work on meta-ethnography reporting of systematic review. But as I will show shortly, one of the important features of a systematic review is the quality control mechanisms that accompany systematic review, so that every literature, every item or data set that you have has to be subjected to some level of quality assurance to make sure that you are able to select the most appropriate sources for your work. And so that component of critical appraisal becomes important. There are different frameworks that helps us to undertake critical appraisal, something we would also share shortly. Once all your selected reviews or your selected articles have been subjected to quality appraisal and you are satisfied that it has met the quality checks, then you move on to your final writing stage of the manuscript and get that ready for publication. Right, thank you. Can we move on, Nidhi?
Yeah.
You want to add something to this slide as well? Go ahead.
No, there are a few questions around what is it that a team includes. So when we say team consultation, so there are some questions and there's been some discussion happening in the chat. Okay. So I thought that if you would like to sort of elaborate when we say team consultation, what would what is it that we mean by that?
Okay, all right, thank you. Now, so I said earlier on that systematic review usually works better with a team. So the team consultation here is that once you have an idea, it's often initiated by one person, someone. So if I have an idea to undertake a study on, let's say, LGBTQI plus community, refugees, and trauma-informed care. I want to think about who will be interested in this kind of study within our school or perhaps even outside our school. Then you can approach them about this idea. If they are interested, of course, then you set up a meeting and consult, think more about the questions, the issues, and clarify the issues. So what I mean by team consultation is it's about, of course, building your team that is relevant. I think there's a section talking about team formation. Building a team that has a similar alignment to your idea and reaching out to everyone to share their thoughts on what needs to be done, clarify the questions. Others have different views. Once you clarify that, clarify on what terms to search for and all that. So that's what I mean by team consultation.
Yeah. I just want to quickly, because there was also discussion around, is the librarian part of the team? Yes, the librarian supports you in undertaking your search from the databases, and she will guide you in that process, but the search is something that you would do. So she is somewhere facilitating in that process. And I would say she's external and not really part of that team, because that team will have to really do a lot of the laborious work that a systematic review involves. So when I'm saying laborious is because if I'm looking at a body of literature that has 90 papers, it has to be me and a colleague who independently look at that, and then we discuss it with a third person. So it is a lot of commitment to look at that kind of literature, and it requires a team that is quite passionate about a topic and is ready to take that kind of work looking at that literature as well. So that interest, that commitment to the work, but also that subject matter expertise within a team is what we're after. Lucy suggested, so if you're doing a PhD, it would, of course, look at you as a PhD student, look at your supervisors who are, who would be working with you. That is part of a team for sure. Yeah. Thanks,
Yeah.
Daniel. Sorry. Yeah, I'll move to the next slide.
No, before you move to the next slide, the aspect of using the librarian, I think, is key. We've just completed 2 systematic reviews, and the librarian has been extremely useful in even helping us rethink some of the things we were thinking about in terms of even guiding our thought on the search terms and supporting us with the database and all that. So it's always a useful thing. But of course, they are usually external, as Nidhi explained. They are not part of the core team working on the research, but they are there as support to the systematic review process. All right, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. There are some questions that are on the chat, and we'll take them once we complete. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Can you move to the next one?
Yeah.
Yeah, so your overall methodology of a systematic review is very important. Some people even go ahead as part of a systematic review for their methodology, which is often called the protocol. They even go ahead to publish it or register the protocol, especially in the health and medical sciences. Every systematic review protocol has to be registered, but in most journals really these days do not bother so much whether it is registered or not. However, some go ahead to, of course, publish the protocol. So the methodology or how the systematic review will be conducted is very key as a beginning point. Now, and obviously the driving factor here is your question, because it is the question that tells you whether a scoping review is adequate or systematic review is most appropriate. Now, you could have a number of questions, obviously the primary questions or the objective, and if you want, a secondary one can also suffice. But there has to be a clearly defined question to drive your systematic review. I often prefer it to be one question is simple to just guide me without complicating the search, but obviously there are others with a number of questions. Then, apart from thinking about the questions and the clarity of the question and the researchability of the question, is also to think about the data sources to be searched. There are different databases, academic journals, articles are on all these databases, but depending on your topic, depending on your discipline, not all databases will be useful for for your search. So you want to be clear in your mind which databases are likely to hold a good source of articles or evidence that could support your work. So you could decide to select those databases, whether PsycInfo, whether, of course, people use Scopus, Google Scholar, there are several of them we can use. Then, of course, you also want to think more about great literature sources. You want to go into government website, or different organizations have reports that you want to use. You should make your mind right from the beginning as part of your methodology. Nidhi, were you saying something?
Oh, no. I was just adding a database, Medline and Synfo. No, I was nothing. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Then, so you are clear in your mind about the databases to go into. Obviously, you cannot go into every database. You spend all your earnings on that. The next decision to make as part of the methodology is also to think about your inclusion and exclusion criteria. What is useful to be part of your review and what is not useful? Making those decisions are very important because it helps you to streamline what works for you. One of the ways people use, or we've often used to really clear the boundaries of inclusion, will be the time frame for the literature to be searched. So am I looking at data or literature between 2010 and 2023? That has to be clear. Or I'm looking at very recent literature from 2020, 2023. The more you close the timeline, the more contemporary your search or your evidence will be. So, but that also depends on the nature of evidence in your field and what you are interested in. Then, of course, the other search inclusion criteria is the issue of language. Are you only interested in documents or papers, articles that have been published in English, or you have capacity for other languages? That has to also be made clear and reported as such. The type of documents you are interested in. Are you only interested in peer-reviewed articles, or journals, or you're interested in books chapters, you are interested in great literature? You have to also be clear about that. And then, of course, any other limits that you may want to add to that. Interestingly, most of the databases have drop-in tools that you can use to clearly limit or delimit your search criteria, and that works well. As part of your methodology, you would also have to think about which quality appraisal tools you are using. And your choice of a quality appraisal tool depends largely on the type of articles you are selecting for your review, because each article has some useful defined quality control frameworks that you can use. And all these frameworks are carefully reported as part of your systematic review, so people can easily verify whether that's been done.
Should I take on this one and then go back?
Good, thank you. Now, so these are some of the quality appraisal tools that we can often use to check the quality of the paper we are reviewing. So if your paper, you are strictly an intervention-based review, looking at how one intervention impacts something else, then you are going into the experimental kind of design. You could use the Critical Appraisal Skills Program, the CASP, for RCT, specifically for randomized controlled trial studies, or you can also use the cohort 2010 statement. These are all online. You could read about them and see how they use them. If your study is not the kind of articles you are selecting are not experimental designs or randomized controlled trial kind of design, but more of quasi-experimental design, such as those that use difference in difference or use propensity score matching, but they are also still quantitative kind of studies. You could also use the JBI critical appraisal checklist that is meant purposefully for quasi-experimental design. or there are other ones like the trend statement or the McMaster critical review form. These are all checklists you pick, take the paper, and of course, using the checklist, go through your paper and see whether this paper meets these standards to fit for use for your review as a quasi experimental design. Of course, there are also some suggested frameworks for quality checking observational studies like the CAPS, with a specific one for cohort studies and a specific one for case control studies. And there is also a specific one for cross-sectional studies or cross-sectional surveys. You could also use the Center for Evidence-Based management. Then, obviously, qualitative design, which most of us also find ourselves using, is the CAPS qualitative framework, specifically designed for you to quality check any qualitative study you are including in your systematic review to ensure that it is fit for purpose. And increasingly, there are others who also review systematic reviews. So if you are going to review a systematic review, then obviously the CAPS systematic review is an obvious choice to go for. There are mixed method studies, and we have the mixed method appraisal tool that you can also use to quality check that. Now, gray literature, if you are including gray literature in your systematic review or any of your reviews, you can also quality check it by using the ADCOTS checklist to just be sure that it has all the markers useful for your review.
Right. Just adding, so mixed methods and the gray literature are relatively new in terms of including in systematic reviews. So the quality assessment tools of these studies are quite limited at the moment.
Yep.
So the ones that, and these have all links, and we will share this presentation, but they are links to all these quality assessment tools here. Yeah. So I'll go back now.
Yeah,
Daniel.
go back to the other one. Yeah. I guess as part of the processes of undertaking the systematic review, the most challenging aspect, I may say, is the screening of study, and then, of course, the data extraction, because that can be quite a lot of work to do. And as we said, it's often good for quality control purposes for two authors to independently screen the articles. So two people independently doing the same thing, using the same inclusion and exclusion criteria and selecting, and then coming together again to cross-check whether there is consistency. We are looking at the same thing, or we are looking at different things. If there are wide variation, then you may have to go back into the drawing board to discuss. If the variations is not enough, is not much, then you can agree on what needs to be included. So obviously the screening follows a process. We normally will start with a title screen based on our search terms or search items. Once the titles come, we pop that up. Then I will show that also shortly in the flowchart. That moves to the next stage, which is the abstract screening. Go through the abstract to see whether it's responding to your research question. If there are discrepancies across the screeners, those who are doing this independent screening, then you may have to have a conversation where the third person comes in, or a third author comes in to also cross-check, and you can have a consensus on what needs to be done. Finalize all the studies that needs to be included in your work. And then, of course, you go into the screening of full text. Now we've selected the title. We've now zoned on the abstract. We are okay. Now we move on to the full papers. We have the full papers now. We have to screen the full papers or the full text for evidence of our research question useful for the review. All right. Now, so to help do this properly, it's the famous Prisma flowchart that comes in different arrangement depending on the focus of your study and the extent to which you want to carry your review. And it can come in different levels of complexity, but obviously there are both the horizontal dimensions and then the vertical dimension to this. Now, the top level, you are looking at one, the previous studies that have been part of this, then your current studies or the new studies, and then of course, if you have identified any other new papers outside the traditional scope. The starting point of using the Prisma is the identification process. So, and here again, the starting point here for some studies, I've seen some studies that have gone way back to look at the previous studies that have been done, previous reviews that have been done on the topic, and then the new ones that are being done now. Here, based on your database, you can report your database hits. Usually we report the hits here, your database hits. If you are using Medline, how many, based on your search terms, how many articles, how many hits did you get? You can report that. On the basis of the number of hits from the databases and registered, you move to the next in terms of those that have to be removed. For that, usually this is where you remove duplicates from that, and anyone that is not eligible for your purpose. If you are using an automated system to extract data, or to search the document, it helps to remove that quickly. Now, then of course, you once you are clear in your mind, you've removed those that are not fitting, then you move into your next stage of the screening, which is the screening process. The screening process subject that to all your search terms and the usefulness of those for your report. Now, there will be reasons to exclude some, so you have to note the numbers that have moved to the screening stage, the numbers that have been excluded, and then, of course, the report on those that you have retrieved for your search, and then those that you have not retrieved for your review. Then the next screening stage, like I said, it depends on the level of the complexity of your work. Next screening stage, you want to report on those that are eligible for your purpose and those that are not eligible for your purpose, and state clearly the reasons why you are excluding them from your review. Of course, as you go through the process, finally, you should be able to come to where the selected papers are fitting for your work. That is the final stage. That's those papers that have been included. The flowchart allows you to be able to identify them and state clearly the reasons for including them. If there are other papers you have identified outside of the databases that you have used, you also have the opportunity to go through the same process, such as gray literature, go through the same process to clean them, and then they remove those that are not relevant until you get to your final stage of including them in your work. Nidhi, do you have anything to add to this?
No, I think you've quite well explained it. And I think just one thing is that you can adapt this Prisma flowchart to how you do your screening. Of course, it is a must to include a Prisma flowchart in both a scoping review and a systematic review of literature, especially if you are looking at publishing your work. You will be asked for a Prisma flowchart. Now they are, so earlier it wasn't there, but now they are Prisma flowcharts for studies that include gray literature, studies that don't include gray literature. So they're quite well demonstrated now. And the detail can be based on how you'd like to provide it. And if the reviewers come back for more, then you have that detail. So it's important that when you are screening your studies to have those details with you on why did you exclude the study of individual studies. And there's a format that you can follow on an Excel, and we'd be happy to share that. But the idea here is to be as exhaustive in your screening as possible and as consultative with your other team member who's doing it with you. So a Prisma flowchart is a key when you're doing such work.
Yeah, thank you. And I particularly find the Prisma flowchart quite exciting because it just guides the thought process as you are working and really guides how you are making decisions across the search and all the things you are making. So very, very useful. When you go to the website, there is the editable version. You can always adapt. If a particular frame doesn't work for you, you can remove some and add some. Really flexible to use. Thank you.
Yes, and Lucy has also added, which is what Daniel also shared with me earlier, that Covidence now generates this chart for you. So all you have to do is now put this information in the software, and it will generate that chart. And it's interesting, we were having this conversation, and this was something that we said we need to use. So yeah, thanks, Lucy, for that.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, over to you.
Yeah, okay. So I will discuss now about more about scoping reviews, and then we'll take a few examples of the different reviews that we have done. So like we shared, that scoping reviews are also equally exhaustive when it comes to defining a methodology. It is quite similar in terms of it is informed by a protocol like a systematic review. The search should be systematic, but and it does involve exhaustive searching, but at the same time, your inclusion criteria of what studies you are including can be quite broad, because the scope of your study or the topic of your study is really broad in a scoping review, because you're trying to map the available literature. You're looking at gaps in a particular literature that's available. Systematic reviews do aim to be transparent and reproducible, whereas your scoping reviews are looking at mapping the literature more. And within a scoping review, you do want to ensure that your data is extracted well and is presented in a structured way. The good news is that you don't have to do quality appraisal in scoping reviews, but in systematic reviews, you do need to do quality appraisal. So you need to sort of assess the quality of all papers in a systematic review. You don't need to do that in a scoping review of literature. So we've sort of, again, noted the steps for a scoping review. You will see that a lot of these are quite similar to that of a systematic review, but the only difference here is that you do not need to quality assess your papers that you have shortlisted. Also, your data analysis and how you analyze and present your findings in a scoping review is around, it's more like a narrative synthesis. So you can do a thematic analysis and you can present that in a scoping review. Whereas, as Daniel shared earlier, that within a systematic review, you would be looking at, if you're looking at quantitative studies, then you look at a meta-analysis. If you're looking at other ways, then you have a meta-ethnography or you have a narrative synthesis. So in each of those, you have to justify why you're using that method of analysis. But in a scoping review, it is it's quite given that you can do a narrative synthesis and you can do a thematic analysis of the findings and you can present those in your paper. So those are the two broad differences within a scoping. Once you're undertaking a scoping review, those are the two broad differences between scoping review and a systematic review. You do have to present a Prisma flowchart in your scoping review as well. So that is there in the scoping review too. So here I've sort of outlined some work that we've published in social science research, because you will also see that a lot of methodology or a lot of terminology that are used in systematic reviews is very health oriented, and terms like interventions or terms like bias in RCT, randomized controlled trials. These can be very medical oriented, but we've used a similar methodology of a systematic review within social science and within an intersection of social science and also health, and we've published this work. What we've also, why I've also highlighted especially the first two papers is because a systematic review also allows you to generate new evidence from existing evidence. So although you are looking at existing literature that is out there, but it allows you that the method of analysis that you do, you can you will be able to create new knowledge in many ways. So if you look at the first paper, it looked at child undernutrition and different forms of child undernutrition, but trying to understand their factors that impact child undernutrition in South Asia. What this paper and findings of this paper has been able to do is it's been able to provide an amended framework, which is to the existing nutrition framework that exists as of now. So you're sort of adding that new knowledge to literature, which is what a systematic review allows you to do. In the second paper, we looked at human rights and in accessing health services amongst Rohingya refugees. What it allowed to do, and this is the ethnographic approach, is that it allowed to develop a framework. So you're looking at the findings and you're trying to understand what the findings tell you, but then you're able to map it in a way, and we were able to map it in a way that tell us what are the barriers in accessing health services by Rohingya refugees. And then what it does is that this is then very useful back to policy and practice. So this can be used as well. So you're not only synthesizing existing literature, but you're also able to create new knowledge from the work that you do through systematic reviews and, of course, scoping reviews as well. So what I would do now is take you through one paper, but what we will do is we'll go through the methodology of the paper, and we'll see more in detail what this paper did do, and we will, of what Daniel has shared, we'll be able to then just go through it briefly. We have the time for this, Lucy?
Yes. Look, we scheduled 2 hours, but it would be good to get to conversation, but I think looking at a practical example is important, so that would be great.
Okay, sure. Can everyone see this screen, which is the paper, or you're still back at the presentation screen?
I think it's still on the presentation screen, so you have to
stop. Okay.
see it, and then yep.
So in this paper, we looked at basically trying to understand, look at the factors and drivers for different forms of child undernutrition within South Asia. And you will see that this paper, as all systematic reviews need to do, is that it looked at, followed the PRISMA guidelines. The latest PRISMA guidelines are 2020 guidelines. And we shortlisted 98 studies. So we looked at gray literature, but we also looked at academic literature. So that's why I'm saying that it's a lot of literature that you're looking at, and you want to sort of analyze it. And we so let me take you through. So within a systematic review, you have to clearly state what is your inclusion and exclusion criteria. And so, for instance, if you're in this paper, we looked at all studies that were conducted from January 2000 to March 2021. So we took as the base year at 2000 because that's where the Millennium Development Goals started. And that's where a lot of discussion around the health of child health and gender and women's health really became a global came on the global agenda, and there was a clear momentum towards acting and providing interventions to responding to these issues. So that's why a base year that you do choose, you have to justify why you're looking at the literature that is from a particular time frame. We looked at a particular region, which is South Asia, and you have to define then within your systematic review, what is that region? So this region is, for us, is based on the United Nations geographical boundaries. So we use those 8 countries. So all literature that is published within this time frame within these 8 countries is what we looked at. The type of studies you have to also define. So we did not look at books or book chapters because we did not have that bandwidth. We only looked at English literature, but we looked at all academic literature. We looked at journal peer-reviewed articles, reports, government websites for any interventions, but those need to be clearly defined when you're writing and you're conducting a review of literature. Then you also have to define what do you mean by child health, child nutrition. So we've clearly defined what are the kinds of nutrition we are looking at here. And this is what your table would look at when you're presenting your findings. And this is the quality assessment that you would be doing in a systematic review. So most of the studies that we assessed had medium quality or high quality. Usually you would not pick a study which has low quality, because then there is either some bias or the findings were not analyzed or presented properly. So you would exclude a study that is low in quality. For us, all studies had either medium quality or high quality in the review. And what I would like to show here is that based on how you synthesize your data and how you analyze, we were able, so this is a new framework that we present where we do sort of within an existing framework that looks at child undernutrition. We are saying that there are major gaps, and it needs to sort of also include gender. It needs to include culture and social norms, practices that need to inform in many ways mainstream interventions within different layers of interventions that are there to address child health and child undernutrition within South Asia. So this is what broadly you are able to produce from the review that you do. I'll go back to the presentation and right. So, sorry, my eyes just went to the question. So I'll just take that question. How do you determine high or medium quality literature? So there is so when the checklist that Daniel shared, you are able to rate, and this is something that you do before, is that you say what parameters are you going to rate your studies on, and then you have you score them based on their quality. Each study type has a different, has separate scoring. And then you define what is high quality, medium quality, and high quality before you even begin quality rating them. So then you are able to quickly identify which studies you can, how you will quality rate your studies. Sorry, I'll go back to the PowerPoint. So this, again, we've discussed the framework. This was another paper that we did. And again, what it allowed us to do is to develop a framework and to understand how health practices and how human rights and approaches can actually inform health practices and how they then need to be intervened. So how health interventions and services can be looked at and viewed from a human rights perspective. So there's a link to this paper here, and you can share, you can have a look at it and see how this was done. And this was also a systematic review. It followed a meta-ethnographic approach. So it did have quality rating on all the papers that we sort of included in our studies. And this is the publication. Then we moved to the scoping review of literature. So here, if you look at the questions that are there in scoping reviews, so compared to the systematic reviews, the scoping reviews have broader questions. So we're looking at, in the first paper that I would discuss more at length, we're looking at women and wash in Nepal. So we're looking at water and sanitation and hygiene. So we're looking at all the literature within this within women and WASH in Nepal. What it also allowed us to do is to identify gaps in literature that helped in future research. So we were looking at more research in Nepal with women and water sanitation and hygiene, and working with different organizations. So it allowed us, and it sort of helped to identify those gaps, and also inform certain research work and other interventional work that we would be doing in Nepal. So this was very useful for that. The second is around online face-to-face versus online teaching. This was during COVID, and this was led by a colleague, Gary Stevens. And it's looking at the difference and what is the preference and what is the literature telling us around online teaching and face-to-face teaching. Again, it was a scoping review of literature, broad, but helped us identify where is this literature taking us. Then we looked at food security and smallholder farming in Pacific Islands. Again, very broad. We actually started this paper as a systematic review, but then ended up in a scoping review because we realized the scope was very broad of this particular paper. You will see that all these papers follow a very similar methodology to a systematic review. They require a lot of rigor. They do require a lot of predefined methodology for screening your studies, for extracting your data. So it is as rigorous as a systematic review, but of course there are differences when you look at analyzing the data, presenting your findings, and also quality assessing your studies. So those are your differences between a scoping and a systematic review of literature. This is the paper. The link of this paper is also provided here. I would not go into this, but what I would like to sort of quickly share with you is the findings that we came up with the literature, because this also was a precursor in many ways for us to then identify the area that we'd like to sort of work on in future as well. So this research told us, and what the literature then told us, is that women's agency and participation in policy and practice related to water, sanitation, and hygiene was quite deeply affected by the patriarchal system within Nepalese culture, and women and girls were particularly vulnerable to water insecurity, and they do bear the major burden of inadequate wash facilities. And this is, of course, a finding that echoes with finding across other low and middle income countries as well, that women bear the burden of inadequate water and sanitation. They also play a central role in managing and safeguarding household water. There was a finding that, and of course, they have limited access to water and are more vulnerable than men to poor sanitation and hygiene and management facilities. Also, due to social expectations, women are expected to provide water for the families. And this was something that was very interesting because it did tell us that there is a lot of anxiety and stress around water and around water insecurity within Nepal, within countries that are water poor in many ways, that are being affected by water insecurity. So what this told us, very broad, this scoping review was, it gave us a clear idea of what is it that we can do further in terms of working in water and sanitation in Nepal and working with women. So it gave a clear idea. Yes, so now we've concluded about scoping review and a systematic review. What Daniel and I thought was that it would be good to, discuss of how is it that you can begin your systematic or scoping review journey. Yeah, I think the first thing is not to get overwhelmed, to be calm, and then of course to take it step by step. And I think, Daniel, we can talk about it, and we can now open up in a discussion to how is it that we can really get on this journey of doing a systematic review in many ways.
Yeah. Thanks, Nidhi. Of course, it can look overwhelming sometimes, but in many ways, it's quite rewarding. As you stay calm, it will be great to think more about a problem that needs to be understood, kind of an evidence gap. We had already talked about the essence of team and people with similar interests and similar passion as you, because if the motivation is not there, the works become burden on one person. So you need to get that. Clearly develop your research question and consult with the team. As we said earlier on, determine which review method is appropriate, whether scoping or systematic review. Clearly work on your protocol or the methodology. You cannot do this without involving the librarian, because they help a lot. And once you are clear in your mind, start assigning role and start your reviewing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Leave it for conversation now, because as we said, we just want to share our thoughts, and all of us will talk through the things. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you okay for me to facilitate the discussion?
Yep. Yes, please.
Yep.
All right. Well, we have a hand up, and that is Erica. Go for it.
Hi, thank you so much, Nidhi and Daniel, for this. This is really helpful and really, really, really great stuff that you've been talking about. My question is around, I'm just trying to lower my hand as well. There we go. My question is around the time frame of these things happening, because I can see that with all these steps that need to be considered, but from start to finish, and then thinking about submitting it to a journal, and then having that journal go through the review process and then get back to you. By the time it's published, from the time you start, I guess my anxieties would be around, what if someone else has published in that time frame, or what if yeah, I suppose if that something has happened in that maybe 6-month period or something that I've missed. I'd like to know, I guess, in your experiences, have you set a time frame where you're like, okay, in these 3 months it has to be done, or we have to redo the, the search again, or we have to conduct another search? That would, yeah, I'd be really interested in the time frame. Thank you.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
maybe I can start, and Nidhi, you can come in.
Sure.
Well, from my experience, a systematic review, for example, a good systematic review would normally take about 6 months or more, depending on the resources and the enthusiasm. But clearly, it should take you about 6 months plus to be able to finish up everything and get it ready for publication. Now, as I said earlier on, one of the things that people often do is to register your protocol. Once you register your protocol, it also locks in the interest in the broader community. The review process, if you submit, we submitted a systematic review. It took how many months? About three or so months before they got back with so many questions and things to attach, and we're still working on it to get it through. Now, so as to whether someone else will run along and publish what you are publishing, that can happen, but it's because we see things differently. They could be related, but obviously you might be quite unique in your way, and so there shouldn't be any fear about that. But time frame, 6 months plus should be okay to do that. Nidhi, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Daniel's been quite efficient. If he's, it does take a little bit more than 6 months, but for if you are doing other things at the time. But yes, ideally it should happen in 6 months, because you are sort of careful that the search that you've done can be dated and you'll need to rerun the search. So 6 months is actually ideal, but we've had experiences where we've had to sort of put a pause and then go back and redo the search because we just didn't have the capacity to do that work. So I think that's why it's very important at the start to have a clear outline of the timeline that you're committing this to, and to be very committed to the work. I do agree, it has to be 6 to 8 months. With systematic reviews, I think the fear of duplication is quite minimal, because you do have to register your systematic review topic, and that has to go online. So if anyone who is doing a systematic review would go check if that it needs, so before even thinking of a systematic review, it's just good to go check if that topic is there, because then that means someone is already doing that kind of work. With scoping reviews, we've not had that challenge till now that someone is already doing it. But having said that, of course, that can happen too, but it's not happened, fortunately, for us. Again, just adding that at times you might have to go back and redo the search if you are not able to follow that time frame for yourself, because if you do submit a journal article and if your search is a year old, the reviewers might come back and say that, just you need to rerun or update your search. So you just need to be very committed and have a clear time frame when you are starting it off.
Before we move to the next question, I'm just going to throw in, I think my approach is probably what we could call extreme qualitative. So I'm probably the very opposite end of the spectrum, and the scoping reviews I've done have been definitely not concerned with the quality component. And I think that's a much quicker process. So I would say the one that I wrote about lateral violence in the queer community, we did turn that around quite quickly. And that's partly because when we did the searches of all the databases, there was very little. So we ended up with a very small corpus, which we then were able to all read really quickly and analyze really quickly and write up. So I think with a much more qualitative scoping review approach, it can be a quicker process and a less in-depth process and a smaller team. And yeah, I use Covidence, I don't know how you say it, for doing that, and that makes it really quick because you can gather all of a lot of the databases, put the articles straight in, and then all of the team members can read them in their own time, and it funnels them out. You extract them out, you read them all again, and you analyze them as a group. So I would say one of those scoping reviews we did in 3 months, but that's because it was a summer scholarship project. So, and it was 14 papers in the end, so it was very few because it was so niche. But that's just me. Just briefly, Erica, does the uni or SOS have a license for Covidence? So you can get a free account, which allows you to do 1 review. But 3, THRI, the Health Research Institute, has an institutional license. And I think the uni has or is getting one so that everyone can access it. We have another question about journal selection. Do you select journals for publishing before or after the review? Are the requirements for publication similar across journals relative to field?
Daniel, are you happy for me to take that?
Yeah, you can go ahead, please.
Yeah. So it's ideal to sort of select a journal before you actually start working on a systematic review or a scoping review. So usually the requirements for a systematic review and scoping review are different when it comes to the word limits, the way you present your findings. So there are different guidelines. Usually your systematic reviews are very longer than your original research article. So there are different guidelines of submission guidelines for a systematic review. Not all journals accept systematic reviews, so it's good to sort of see what journal you would be targeting even before. Once you start preparing your manuscript, just check which journal you're interested in, and if that's the one that's taking, is accepting systematic reviews. And there are some specific journals that take systematic reviews. There are specific journals that take protocols. So you have BMC protocols, you have social science protocols that take protocols and accept protocols as publications. Although protocols are not full publication papers, but it's just, if you need to have a protocol published, those are the platforms to do it.
Excellent, thank you.
I could have got you to ask your own question, sorry. And then I would also say for scoping reviews, we literally went through all of the LGBT focused journals, looked at what kind of papers they take and found the ones that took scoping reviews and then chose the most appropriate one from there and the highest ranking one from there. Cool. Peter, did you want to ask your own question?
I guess so, if you don't mind me repeating what I put in the chat already. And sorry about I don't have my, I can't turn on. Yes, there we go. Sorry. So just ignore the horror here. So yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that question I put in earlier, and Lucy, you mentioned it was something that was worthwhile bringing up in the chat. The idea of team consultation, I can see, of course, the value in that, and also with the PRISMA protocols, the need for that. But what happens when you're in a position, you've come in, you're looking for the right funding, you don't necessarily have an established research team. You've indicated in both the conversation and in the chat that, you know, a library, the SOS librarian is external to what the team involves. I mean, how do you get that engagement? How do you bring people in order to start this work if you don't have the existing funding? What are the options there? Is it something that, you know, or are you trying to do something that's not systematic or scoping review?
All right, Nidhi, perhaps I can start and then you come in.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
I mean, it's all about team building and how these things work. There are some of the systematic reviews and scopings that we have worked on without funding.
Yeah.
But obviously, you need funding to do things. Recently, about a month ago or so, Nidhi, you approached me. Nidhi has interest in something on aging, and Nidhi knows that I do research on aging. So she put together an initial idea for systematic review and approached me. Daniel, will you be interested in this project? Because I want us to do this systematic review. And I said, yes, I am interested. And then she approached somebody else and somebody else. Now, how many are we on that team? About 4.
Yeah, 4, 5.
Five on that team. So now we have a team. We've started circulating ideas on what to do, even though there is no funding. Now we are working on this together as a team because we know it's a good project and as a precursor for developing evidence to inform any grant applications in the future.
Okay, great point.
So that's a typical example of how you
great point. Yeah. So in a way it does, there's a little bit of faith involved in that in terms of getting that and garnering that engagement and so on, or that participation. But yeah, it's got to follow forward impact for being part of that team. Okay, that's great. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to piggyback that with another question. I noticed that for the Prisma flowchart, there are a lot of quantitative indicators involved in that. And I understand that's part of the protocol, it's part of what we could say the methodology requirements for it. But that point about how many hits that are how many hits does a particular piece get in order to indicate level of relevance? I mean, how's that going to work for far more qualitative or theoretical based projects? You know, where some of that sort of working and thinking with relevance is either still coming forward or may not get the uptake it needs. Or how do you use quantitative measures to consistently, for something like even just a scoping review, determine what the relevance of that publication or that input is going to be or to have?
Okay. Nidhi, would you like to come in?
Yeah, sure. Within this presentation, there are links to studies that have Prisma flowcharts. Have a look at those. The one that we presented is the latest flowchart that is up there on the Prisma guide website. You don't necessarily have to follow it to the T. You adapt to what you are doing, and in qualitative work as well. You decide the relevance of the studies that you include based on the inclusion and exclusion criteria that you have defined, right?
Yeah,
so you define that beforehand. It is not anyone external that would define it. When you undertake that search, even before that, you have defined what is going to be the scope of the study that I do include within this systematic review or scoping review of literature. So it's really how you find it and how you define that for yourself. Once you do get a chance, look at the flowcharts in the studies because the links are provided there. They have adapted, and especially the scoping review has all qualitative studies that we included. We also had gray literature that we included, and we presented that in a flowchart. Within the systematic reviews as well, because we followed an approach to analyze it, which is qualitative, which is meta-ethnography. Although the study types were quantitative and qualitative, you are able to present those in the flowchart in a way that is friendly and can be adapted to both quant and you can adapt that basically.
Right. No, that helps clarify a lot. Thanks so much.
Perhaps to just add a little, the flowchart really is not about quantitative studies per se.
Yeah.
The whole logic of the flowchart is to help you answer the question, how many articles have I found? how many are useful, how many do I remove, and why do I remove them? That kind of thinking. Just
Okay.
that. It's all about
the-
numbers. Yeah, and why.
So the relevance criterion is not just determined by, you know, existing number of hits and citations, etc. There are other ways of, and I think you both just clarified that really well, of being able to establish
Exactly.
the
And
methodology.
I would say the Prisma charts I've generated have been bare bones, because I have done, you know, inclusion and exclusion criteria at the start, and it's quite human, like qualitative inclusion and exclusion. It's things like, okay, does this, it might have Australia in the title, or it might have Australia in the full text even, but it's not actually about Australia, so it's out. Or it might have queer in the text, but it's so tangential that it's not relevant. So yeah. Oh, look, Kristen has shared an amazing guide to qualitative systematic reviews. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fantastic.
Thank you, Christine.
Yeah. And thank you, Daniel, Nidhi, and also Lucy.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Kristen, did you want to talk about any systematic or scoping reviews you've done that have been more qualitative?
Yeah, sorry. Thanks for a fantastic session to everyone here, and Lucy for hosting. Yeah, I'm in medicine, so I do a lot of the sort of intervention-based work, but you can actually there are guidelines for qualitative systematic reviews specific to that. So I'd definitely consult that, and they're becoming a bit more common in medicine as well, and I think really relevant for people working in social sciences. And you can also follow that if you're doing mixed methods systematic reviews as well. So you could do a meta-analysis of all the quantitative findings, but you can also review the qualitative findings, or you can do purely qualitative systematic reviews, and of course scoping reviews. Thanks everyone.
Thank you. And you're one of those people who is across medical and social sciences, so yeah, very relevant. Any more questions, comments? Anyone want to share anything? I would just like to say thank you so much for your time. There was some session happening, I believe, tomorrow in the library about systematic reviews. So have a look on the library website. I just saw that today. But, you know, otherwise I'm not going to lie, my introduction to Covidence was through watching YouTube videos about how to use it. There's a lot out there, and reach out to colleagues. So Peter, you were asking about building a team. A lot of that is just about going to people and saying, hey, I have this idea, like Daniel said, I have this idea. Would you be interested in collaborating? So yeah, we will send out the link to the video and the slides so that you can go over the links, all of the amazing links that were in there. Thank you so much. But otherwise, I just want to take the time to thank our amazing speakers today. So much for your time. And everyone stay in contact. If anyone here is not on the mailing list for Sexualities and Genders Research, please send me an email and I will add you. Otherwise, have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
all.
Thank you for organizing, and thank you everyone for coming. Thank you.